What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, where we look at all things mental health and psychology. If you're new to GetPsyched, then you can subscribe to us, you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time we upload videos on mental health topics, psychology topics and personal development topics. And today we're taking a look at anger management. And there's a reason why we're taking a look at this around this time, because earlier in the month, in December, around about the first week of December, it was Anger Management Awareness Week. And that was kind of put in place in order for people to raise awareness about how to manage anger better and to understand what anger and anger management is really all about. So that's what we're going to do today on GetPsyched. Now, anger is a very common emotion for people, and actually statistically speaking, 1 in 4 adults have committed an act of road rage, and 13 out of 1,000 people have been physically attacked as a result of anger, and 24 out of 1,000 people have experienced attacks on their vehicle as a result of people's anger. So this is actively a very common issue. People experience rage, or they experience acts as an act of aggression or based off of people's anger. And actually in this same report, the statistics showed that 1 in 10 people have expressed that their anger at times has felt uncontrollable. So for people, anger can be a massive issue. Now, what exactly do we mean when we say anger management? Basically, anger management is about the ability to be able to control or manage, as the term suggests, our anger, not necessarily to get rid of it. So anger management is not anger destruction. It's not anger eradication. It's none of that stuff. Like in Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, an alcoholic program where people are trying to eradicate their alcohol intake. They're not trying to manage their alcohol intake. If people are addicted to alcohol, they need to get it out of their life. It's something they need to get completely rid of. That's not the case with anger, and there's a perfectly good reason for that. It's because anger is a perfectly normal emotion, and it's an appropriate emotion. Being able to control anger is important, not necessarily to get rid of it. We actually need anger. It's a perfectly appropriate response to issues that require it. If you didn't have an angry response to some things, some stuff would never get done. You think of activism in today's society. If people weren't angry about injustices, or if they weren't angry about social oppression in some form or another, then nothing would get done to rectify those issues. Now, when anger is mismanaged, or when anger can get too excessive or even become violent in some instances, which of course does happen, that's a step too far. That's where anger management needs to come in place. But anger management doesn't mean that angry emotions are bad. It doesn't mean we need to get rid of anger. It just means we need to manage it. So how do we actually manage our anger? Well, the first tip I'm going to look at, the first point I'm going to look at, is actually kind of reflective of what we've just talked about. We need to recognize that being angry is okay. It's okay to have angry emotions. And if you get to a point where you think, gosh, it's really, really bad that I have anger and I really need to manage my emotion, and anytime I feel that angry emotion, I need to suppress it, I need to reduce it, that is going to drive more and more emotional sensitivity to anger. So actually it can be counterintuitive. So we need to recognize that it's okay to be angry, and actually there are situations where your anger can be very well placed. There are, of course, other practical steps and tips that we can put in place to help manage anger a little bit better. And the first one is to acknowledge and identify the anger. This in turn makes it very much easier, at least, to reduce the subsequent shame and guilt that can be responded as a result of anger. So often what can happen with people who have real anger issues is that when they feel very angry, they can then have a subsequent feeling of shame or guilt that they've been so angry. So actually being aware and identifying the anger when it happens can be very, very powerful, because often anger emotions can feel out of control. We bring a level of control to them by identifying them, by acknowledging them, by being in a situation that's making you feel angry and saying, okay, I recognize my anger here, I recognize what's causing that. That can be a really powerful tool when it comes to anger management. I think there's also something here about identifying triggers. And if we're able to identify our triggers, we're much more equipped, we're much better prepared, we can anticipate even, or potentially avoid the anger and utilize coping strategies or coping mechanisms that can be put in place to help manage that anger a little bit better. Often what happens when people have real anger issues, they don't necessarily recognize what triggers there are around them. Or maybe they do know those triggers, but they don't do anything to avoid them or to anticipate them or to manage them a little bit differently. So for example, if this is a really kind of basic example, but if you're a football fan and when your team's losing, you get that trigger of adrenaline, that trigger of anger really hits you, and that can lead you to becoming really, really angry, and that anger can almost get out of control and can feed into other parts of your life. That trigger of watching football is something that needs to be managed to some degree or not. Maybe you need to reduce the amount of football you watch, and that might sound unattractive to some people, but when anger can become such an issue for people's life, it's actually worth doing. There can of course be other mechanisms that need to be put in place to help manage those triggers a little bit better, but actually identifying the triggers, managing them, anticipating them as well can be really powerful. So for example, that football fan, it doesn't necessarily need to be that he takes football out of his life. He can just anticipate, right, I know that if my team are losing or playing badly, I can feel really angry. Here's what I need to do instead in order to manage that anger a little bit better. Identifying the triggers can be really, really powerful. I think there's also something here about taking a look at the bigger picture. And I think that sounds really basic, but it can be a really important step when it comes to anger management. And the reason I say take a look at the bigger picture is that what often can happen when angry emotions get out of control, or they become so consistent and so impactful in our lives, is that we become so focused in on the one thing that's causing that anger, and we lose sight of everything else around it. So for example, our analogy about a football fan who gets really angry at his team losing, looking at the bigger picture and recognizing that it's, I know this sounds really basic, but it's just a game, or it's just a bit of fun, or actually I enjoy watching my team. It doesn't have to ruin my day if my team lose, for example. That ability to kind of scan out and take a look at the bigger picture can be a really helpful exercise, and often a visualization process can be utilized in therapy at times to help with that, thinking about like an eagle's eye view of the scene, of the picture. What actually are some of the other things going on around the kind of football game? What kind of things are more important than the football game? What kind of things does the football game represent to you? It's just fun, it's an enjoyable thing that you maybe do once or twice a week to kind of take your mind off of work. That's a good thing, okay? So taking a look at the bigger picture can be very, very helpful when it comes to anger management. There's also something here about recognizing anger management when it comes to angry, provoking situations that can come from other people. Now, I think everybody can recognize that. More often than not, our anger can be very focused on others, and there can be situations that arise in our lives or in the lives of other people that can cause a real high level of anger. And so I thought it was really important to kind of address that and recognize that in this video. And I think it's important to recognize that when we're in experiences with people that causes a lot of anger, that opinions are just opinions, they're not facts. And I say that because often what people say to us or what people say about certain things that we don't like can cause a huge amount of anger, and that can be very difficult to manage. I think again our previous point about thinking about the bigger picture can be really applicable here, and thinking about somebody who maybe shares a different opinion to you, it's important to look, or maybe even an opinion that you completely disagree with, it's important maybe to look at that person from a bigger picture. There are many other factors in that person's life or upbringing that maybe have led them to that opinion. Showing a level of empathy to that person for that opinion can be very helpful when it comes to managing our anger. Again, when we get so controlled by our anger can be so focused, it's because we focus in on those one little details and we forget the bigger picture. And I think it's important to do that when we're maybe in a conversation with someone else. We need to recognize that their opinion is just their opinion. It's not necessarily facts. They may try and argue them as facts, but we need to recognize that there's a bigger picture at play there as well. Managing our responses to other people can be really helpful when it comes to anger, managing our anger. I wanted to kind of add on to that as well and think a little bit about a process that might be useful for when we're in situations with people that cause us to feel like a high degree of anger, to the point where that anger can be out of control. Now, what I say again here is that it's okay to feel angry about something that somebody says to you. So if somebody says something that's unfair or blatantly wrong or unjustified or unethical, then those are the kind of responses that require a level of controlled anger in us to stand up and say something about that, or to rectify that situation, or to put our point across. But sometimes that can get out of control, and that's where anger management comes in. So I think when that happens, allowing a clearing process for when your anger is related to someone else can be very, very useful. Like I said, often that anger can be kind of directed to other people, and at times we can unleash that anger and create a conflict or conflictual situations that lead to more anger. Or we can hold on to the anger and not address the situation that can create a kind of pressure cooker effect until the anger totally bursts and no one is positively affected. So I think one of two things can happen there. So what we call a clearing process can be very, very useful to not allow the anger to burst, and for that to be a negative situation, and not for the anger to be bottled up to the point where it bursts eventually. because then no one's positively affected. So both of those are not good responses to anger. A clearing process can help us manage it a little bit better, and I'm going to go into some detail about what that means. So this clearing process requires you to take some time away from that person and later approach them when you're feeling more distant from the anger-provoking situation. Now that's not to say you feel calmer. That's about feeling more distant, because I don't think necessarily often just creating space or getting away from the situation will make us feel calmer. It can create distance, and that's important. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a couple of days that you take distance from that anger-provoking situation. Then come back and request to speak to that individual and highlight a couple of points. Express how you're feeling about the situation. Express why you feel it. Express what you want to happen and what you are willing to do in order to mediate that situation. Now that could include saying, listen, I was wrong in this. I recognize maybe what I said there wasn't fair, or something to that effect. But those steps can really help with a clearing process to help manage that anger a little bit better. That's a really effective tool, utilizing anger management, that people can utilize as a process. Taking that distance, thinking about those steps can be very, very helpful. The last point I would say here as well, and this is one that I actually think is probably one I speak a lot about on GetPsyched, because I think it's really it's reflective in many things in life. I think journaling can be a really powerful tool here when it comes to anger management. Allowing angry thoughts or angry emotions to be taken out of our mind and onto paper, written down, can be really, really powerful. Actually, the cathartic process of writing it down can be helpful, but also looking at it, reading it, reflecting back on it can be even more powerful. So if you allow yourself to journal a little bit about situations that cause you anger, allow that anger to come out onto the paper, but think as well about more positive ways of stepping forward. How can I manage that angry situation better in the future? That can be a really, really powerful tool. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week we've been taking a look at anger management off the back of Anger Management Awareness Week, which was at the start of December this year. And we've been looking a little bit about what anger management is all about, the emotion of anger, and also practically the first really key steps in overcoming severe anger and allowing ourselves to experience a little bit of anger management. If you've enjoyed today's video guys, then make sure to hit that like button. You can comment on the video as well and I'll be sure to get back to you. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, and you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks so much for watching guys, and hopefully catch you next week.